Greetings everyone, we are together with you at our 55th video.
Good evening everyone. Our dear friends that watched all those 54 videos in this series may be thinking, alright, system works in this way, and okay, I am at this or that point in understanding my true self. But what should I do for more? Well, this evening, the passages we will read will give some answers to this and similar questions. Some important passages we will read, so I'd like to urge our dear friends to be attentive.
Next week will be our last video with you. Later, Oya will join me for a month. Following that month, I think we will be reading passages about time. These may be challenging for us, but Mr. Bulant will join me. He is very interested in the topic of time. So, together we will do our best to make this topic easily understandable with images and examples. I hope that having different commentators in this series is beneficial for our dear friends, as it is for me. I think that as we follow the narrative of the book, we enrich our comments with different perspectives we have, with our examples that evoke many new associations in us. Yes, let's start reading. Every man is under the service of one or several of the communal plans. This serving is sometimes optional, but most often mandatory. These mandatory propulsions are still orientated to sublime purposes. Actually, mankind is willing to propel itself forward out of anxiety to survive. Some spend their lifetime in a mental institution as a result of self-indulgence, some are imprisoned, some remain buried in grueling conditions in the depths of mines for a lifetime to earn their daily bread. All of these are for attaining the intuition of the knowledge of duty, that is, for reaching states that enable mankind to adapt the comprehension of divine necessity and to harmonize with it. The more a man makes efforts to do it and be successful, the closer he gets to the plan of duty with fast and sure steps, and the sooner he gets over the suffering, heavy stages of world life. If he cannot do this, and is continuously defeated by his earthly craving, if he does not make efforts to pull through and complies with the backward feelings and simple thoughts, if he sees the world as a means for satisfaction of his earthly cravings, but not a means for the application of his world plan, and if he acts in this way and violates the necessities of his plan, then things go awry. In this case, his communal plans, preparations, and life conditions, which have been advancing automatically, are directed into a path for improvement of his actions. This is done by the beings in duty. That man observes the stern look of his life conditions, without comprehending the reason for them, as he starts to fall into hardship. His affairs turn bad. Material or emotional problems and pains start to follow one another. He is still not aware of the origins of these, and his life feels grim. He attempts to put the blame on fate, luck, society, mankind, etc. However, the developmental mechanism, which is unfailing in accordance with his plan regulated by his states and behaviors, continues to work without paying any attention to his fuss. If he still does not behave and try to improve his comprehension, things will continue to get dimmer, his troubles increase, and he struggles to the point of rebellion. However, this rebellion directs him to a dead end and leads him to a prison, a hospital, a mental institution, or to a grave, or any other similar life conditions which are heavy and compelling. All of these are the events that occur out of the execution of decisions made by the plan of duty through beings in duty, in order to have him do the deeds which are necessary for his evolution particular to that moment, but which he cannot, with his own comprehension.
This is another passage that we can discuss for hours, because it contains almost every question that we ask to ourselves: what to do? What are the reasons of those events happening to me? What is the purpose of all those events in life? And such. We had discussed the necessity of the communal plans for the development of our comprehension and conscience, while preparing us to the requirements of the plan of duty. Here, we read there are various communal plans: family, society, nation, race, etc. Each of us in the midst of the communal plans, and is involved in more than one of these plans, and we may be included in such communal plans willingly or unwillingly. For example, the family unit. Let's say 40 years before we are born into our family, there was a blood feud between ours and another family. As a consequence of becoming a member of our family, we would involuntarily be dragged into some events related to this feud. Or, just look at the recent history of many countries where the state policy is all about discrimination among the citizens, be it their beliefs or sects they follow, or their political ideologies or economic strata. Persons mandatorily become included in the consequences of such events and actions, even though they have no relation or activity related such discriminated groups. However, optional serving is also mentioned in this passage. Well, the closest example is our society and our foundation. One day comes and someone mentions a non-profit or non-governmental organization giving public lectures or offers social services about the topics you are interested of, and you go and attend one of those lectures or activities, and then you may decide to become an active member. We see new friends are joining us each week, and from their questions we can deduce that they are invited by their friends to join this series. Those kinds of attractions lead us to such communal plans we give service willingly. When we consider the fact that all communal plans that we are involved with, be it willingly or unwillingly, voluntarily or involuntarily, are full of good and bad events that will contribute and add something to our development. Yes, it may look like we are dragged by the circumstances and conditions of events, but actually, these are directed to complete our lacking points and carry our development to the point it should be by now. And of course, again, the main purpose of all those events we live in through communal plans are to increase our intuition of duty. There is a saying, as above, so below. Last week we had explained the complete cooperation and coordination that exist in the plans of duty and among the beings in duty. And what we experience here in the communal plans, and what we are preparing for, are at least the minuscule examples of that complete coordination and cooperation. Actually, every sentence in this passage is like an adage, telling us that. You learn to become such more and more, so you can reach a stage of adaptation to the divine necessities, of becoming of that divine harmony. And we read, "The more a man makes efforts to do it and be successful, the closer he gets to the plan of duty with fast and sure steps." So, as you see, development and evolution are not free. The presence of sensuality or earthly cravings within our conscience mechanism is not in vain. We have to overcome this side of our duality unit by spending effort and super efforts, because we cannot go and sit by and listen to a spiritual master for 3 days, and then we become like angels, enlightened and without any problems. Nope, there is no such world. Yes, such people may inspire us, we receive good influences from them, etc. But these are external and temporary. We need to kindle that fire within and keep it alive by our efforts and work. And what happens when we cannot or don't make effort in that direction? Well, as we read, then things go awry. We had discussed the troubling and arduous events the system places on our path if we insist to sat in our comfort zone, to live by automatisms. Yes, the world life is a means to an end. It is only providing us with experiences for helping to complete our developmental stages. But if we make the means our focus rather than the end, then the life events begin to become heavy, arduous, suffering. Years ago, when I was not a member yet but attending the public lectures of our foundation, lecturers were using a phrase, "Language of the events, language of the events." Within years I started to understand this language, and it does not need any deciphering indeed. It is easy to understand if we are observant about ourself and how we live our life, because at the points we cannot walk by ourself or we tend to neglect spending effort towards the necessary direction, then life events begin to give small warnings to us. If we cannot understand these, then the intensity and frequency of these increase. The pitter-patter of events, if necessary, becomes boom-boom if not enough, then doom and gloom. Yet, I am not talking about forcing ourselves to search for divine messages from universe in every little feather, under every stone. This is not how we develop our senses for detecting the finer and subtle language of events. Each day, we can devote a short period of time for some contemplation or meditation as a reality check, or sensuality check to notice the points we went to the extremes and disrupted our inner balance. Again, we read here our biggest tendency as humans, putting the blame on fate, luck, society, mankind, etc. But I think our dear friends that read the Divine Order and the Universe, or followed this reading and commentary series until this 55th video, know that the main factor of whatever happens to them in their life is themselves, that there is no external power or construct punishing them arbitrarily, whimsically. Even if some of us still think like this, then as we read the passages on destiny and time, I am sure you will change your way of thinking. And at the last paragraph of the passage, we read how heavy and compelling the conditions and circumstances of live events might be. We do not or cannot do the deeds necessary for our development by our own level of comprehension. Then, it means that we need to learn more through harsher life events. Sometimes, life situations or conditions of some persons suddenly change for the better, and if we can closely observe them, we may learn that they had gone through a very compelling and hard phase, like escaping from a deadly accident, or overcoming an arduous cancer treatment and becoming healthy again. Such events radically change a person's way of living. Well, actually, death is always imminent because we don't know the time or place of our death. Yes, we humans frequently say that life is short, but facing with this fact as a first-hand experience is seriously transforming. Yes, we talk about 500 to 700 lifetimes of a human being, each, let's say 70 to 80 years long on the average. Compared to infinity, these lifetimes are just like moments. And yes, death is imminent. One of us can die right now. And living with this fact, we should be conscious about it. I mean, there is no guarantee that I can finish this sentence here and now. Yes, this passage is full of sentences that motivates us to think and ponder on each of them. That will be very beneficial for all of us.
Yes, in this passage when I read, mankind is willing to propel itself forward out of anxiety to survive. I remember those rebellious questions all of us asked in times of trouble. How come I chose this suffering? No way I chose those unloving parents. What do you mean that I chose to be abused, or handicapped, etc.? There is an example I use in my public lectures to explain the differences between the life plan we made before incarnating and the life we live in the world. I guess I shared it a few times in our previous videos, but let me tell it again first. We need to understand that the difference is in the higher level of comprehension. The life plan is outlined in another realm. Before our birth, as a being getting ready to outline a life plan for the next incarnation in the world, we are like at the top of a skyscraper. And we look at everything from a very high point of view. And we have a aim, a destination. We will go from one point to another point. And as a being at that high point, I have a feeling about the path I will walk on, and I see some paths from high above, and choose one path that has the highest potential of taking me to my aim. After getting prepared, I take the elevator and go to the ground floor. Okay, now I am born and I am here, in the world, in and on my path. All those preparations I did at the top of the skyscraper now manifest in my life as parents, family, the beliefs, assumptions, thought and behavioral patterns I receive from them, or as talents, abilities or dispositions that will help me to walk my path, or that will hinder me on my path. Because I look at my path and see some details I didn't see when I chose my path by looking down from that higher point of view. There are potholes on my path, or some rocks and stones, big ones that I need to walk around, or small pebbles that make the path slippery. And I ask, what's that? Why there are potholes on my path? Why this or that thing seduces me? Why I am so unlucky? Why is this? Why is that? I ask such questions, and I blame all external things for dragging my own feet, for not making much distance from the point I started because in this physical human form, I am restricted by the limits of my consciousness, my perception, my perspective, and by the fact that I don't remember the life plan I outlined with the help of the beings in duty before I was born. However, all those hardships on my path are related to the required details of that plan. According to my life plan, I must display the effort of jumping over the potholes, walking or climbing over the big rocks, observing and noticing what attracts me in a good way and what seduces me in a not-so-beneficial way. Waking up gradually from the slumber world life puts me into. In short, learning from my experiences and completing my lacking points outlined and underlined my life plan. This is the purpose of all troubles and hardships on our path. That is why we say, you chose this life, you attract your life, etc. And because we have a spiritual outlook about life, we must be much more vigilant about this deep slumber, fantasies, and ungrounded expectations. For example, before the disclosure of the divine order and the universe, many people were expecting this book to read and to be enlightened right away. Well, of course, they felt disappointed when this did not happen, because, as this book explicitly explains, the whole system has a gradual progress, nothing happens at once. Yes, we can accelerate our steps on our path by following some rules and sequences of progress, but we cannot omit any given steps, we cannot jump ahead. Yes, this book revisits this fact again and again, and emphasizes the importance of making efforts and super efforts, and of displaying some more efforts at the point whenever the circumstances look hopeless. Because, when we die, how we lived our life, how we remained aligned with our life plan, will be much more important during the great accounting at the Spatium period. And, as you just said, we may die any time, any moment. An earthquake may happen, a fire may break out, we may have a heart attack, anything may happen any time. That's the reason of that old adage. Work for this world as if you will live forever, and work for the hereafter as if you will die tomorrow. This is, again, all about making efforts for both sides of our existence. Yes, we are on our path, but there are so many distractions on the roadside that they intrigue and seduce us, then we leave our own path and follow some side roads, which sometimes end in cul-de-sacs. Sometimes, we lost our path, and we need to be pulled, pushed, or dragged towards the path. Still, the seductive whispers of the sensational appearances of the world life are strong, and most of the efforts we must make is all about finding our own path again and again, because such whispers of earthly cravings tell us, "Come here, you have been walking for so long, you are tired, get some rest. You deserve this." And this whisper of the sensuality, or our egoistical side, is the most definitive one. When we begin to think that we deserve or entitled for this or that thing, we become lethargic. This is the most slippery point of our developmental journey. We begin to assume that we must take, not give, we must stop, not walk, etc. However, as the old adage goes, the duty is not given, it is taken. The good thing is that life never lets us to become lethargic, and always pushes us for taking necessary steps from within to outside. I like this phrase in this passage. If he still does not behave, and try to improve his comprehension, then, it means, human being has a tendency for misbehaving. Maybe, this is why Gurdjieff says that man attracts his destiny, and if we don't improve our comprehension, then, we cannot expect life to behave. And we need to be conscious of not only about our actions and words, but also about what we think, because what we think is also a transmission from our magnetic field, and carries a potential. More we think about certain things, we feed those potentials, and they may become happenings that our life is attracted to. Yes, let me go back to that path example. We had mentioned that all those hardships are actually lessons we agreed to learn in our current lifetime for advancing our development. We chose those compelling conditions and circumstances voluntarily, and these become our destiny as we live through them. In a way, we say to the beings in duty, "If I deviate from my path, please pull me back." We say to our parents, "I come to reveal my inner power, so please reject me, don't love me, so I can rely on my own devices." Well, in this passage, some extreme ends are mentioned like a prison, a hospital, a mental institution, etc., but you know those tabloids that are full of who murdered who in a family? When we read and hear such news, we assume that such incidents are always about other people. But a day comes and suddenly similar events become our reality, our new field for tests and trials.
Your words reminded me an example given by Mr. Russelman during one of his lectures at the Ankara University. Laws of nature erect such a wall on the man's path that it is too high for him to jump over and too deep for him to go underneath. It becomes mandatory for the man to walk around that wall. However, he has no idea that his feet need to be strengthened because ahead on the path, he will need stronger feet, and this hardship life brings to him is actually for the necessary strength he will need later.
A few days ago, it was the 62nd anniversary of Mr. Russelman's death. We remember him with gratitude and our heartfelt thanks for the trail he blazed for us, for his relentless pursuit of truths regarding our existence. Now, there are many books, many podcasts, many videos, many trainings about spiritual matters. Years ago, our society, publishing house and the radio broadcast was the first and for a while, the only one in our country. From that root, so many seedlings thrived. And if we can talk about these topics today, if we make efforts for making this knowledge more accessible, it is because of his efforts and work. He was beyond his time, and despite of many challenging circumstances, he opened this path of neo-spiritualism and gained support from many scientists and well-educated people. Yes, may our path be open. Of course, we don't know when we will die, but we will be trying to do our best to widen the scope of our efforts for understanding this book he compiled better and better, and to carry the torch until that destined time arrives. Yes. Let's continue reading. Therefore, what mankind needs to do in order to be able to leave this intermediary milieu, this suffering and arduous world soon and successfully, is to work to digest the realities of their conscience mechanisms, which are connected to altruism and love of duty, and to rescue themselves from the strong bonds of their selfish desires and appetites, which they do not want, to leave out of the pressure of their earthly cravings, with comprehension, and the success in this depends only on the efforts done by resignation, self-sacrifice, and love of duty. We give a worldwide criterion which ensures the safety and success of the directions of the efforts that must be done in this struggle. This knowledge will make easier the distinction between the concepts of good and bad. Good and bad are concepts pertaining to the higher and lower realities of conscience respectively. If these concepts can be discerned well from each other, it becomes easier for comprehensions to regulate the advance of conscience. Each deed to be done should harm neither the higher nor the lower. This is the criteria. For example, while intending good for the lower, harming the higher is bad. Likewise, while doing good to the higher, harming the lower is again bad, and in either case entails the responsibility at the scales of conscience. Actually, if the ones who have more or less advanced comprehensions take the deeds to do into consideration within this context, they will see that if the good to be done either for the higher or the lower is true goodness, it will beneficial for the other as well, and will not harm it. However, if a deed done for the one side harms the other side, then that deed will not be a true goodness for either side. For example, a man who rescues a child from a beating, for simply doing good for the child, by a father who is responsible for that child's upbringing, who does this for deterring the child from his stealing habits, and encourages the child's bad whims by doing so, may look doing good for the lower from the superficial outlook, but harms it by disrupting the duty of the higher. Therefore, as a matter of fact, this deed is bad for the father as well as for the child. If the man acts with such attention and succeeds in avoiding bad, how nice! He will arise by a swift path. If he cannot succeed, the possibilities and regulations which should ensure this success by enforcing him through automatic ways will be waylaid on his path by the help of beings in duty.
This phrase about the need of humans to work to digest the realities of their conscience mechanisms which are connected to altruism and love of duty, and to rescue themselves from the strong bonds of their selfish desires and appetites, which they do not want to leave out of the pressure of their earthly cravings, with comprehension. I think we need to elaborate on some terms. What is will? What is desire? Will or want means a being's willing or wanting something, and desire means a being's inclination towards something. So, I understand that wanting something is different than doing that thing a being desires by its will. Yes, in the sense of self-knowledge, we must need to know that all of us have weak points that wait to ambush us. We all have certain desires, certain tendencies, certain peculiarities we try to manage or master. If these are especially intense and dark, we try to hide them from others. Generally, in our current past and past lifetimes, some incidents, some experiences, some traumas we had started or triggered these. And sometimes, in psychoanalysis, some traumas irrelevant to current conditions may surface with such different tendencies that, only in deep sessions, such a tendency can be linked to that trauma. I mean, a tendency is something that sympathizes with some certain events or things. It should relate to me this or that way that it can attract me. Therefore, we must know, notice, and bring into the light these desires, tendencies, emotions that sometimes we are lived by, sometimes we knowingly disregard or don't want to see at all. Sometimes we are afraid of facing it, so deny completely, and we must strengthen our muscle of willpower to reject or negate these. Then their voice becomes hushed, slowed down, and finally silent. Of course, whenever necessary, these sensuality factors are provoked or poked by the beings in duty to direct us to the necessary experiences to increase our knowledge about our own weak points. And I think the Far Eastern philosophies that advise not becoming attached to whatever arises in our minds are only correct up to a point, because detachment is not enough. We also need to know their effect on our life, to discern their subtle signs, because I think these are the points where our inner battles continue on. And we read about a double criterion in this passage. Each deed to be done should harm neither the higher nor the lower. This is the criteria. And this example of a father beating his child for deterring the child from his stealing habits, and someone prevents him beating his child, but by doing this, may encourage the child's bad whims. And in connection to this criterion, this important emphasis on distinction between the concepts of good and bad, we need to revise the meanings and values we assign to these concepts by remembering this criterion. While intending good for the lower, harming the higher is bad. While doing good to the higher, harming the lower is again bad. And this requires us to be vigilant about our own reasons, desires, and tendencies that stay hidden at the background of our actions whenever we intend to do good deeds. In his earlier books, Mr. Russelman gives an example of such a deed, giving money to beggars, because we don't know the real reasons behind a person's becoming a street beggar by giving money. We can encourage that person to continue like this. In short, instead of making a human to rely on external help, encouraging that human to discover and manifest their own power, our dear friends may think of many examples for this criterion explained in this passage.
Well, our dear friends are commenting on the chat box about the example of the father beating his child. I'd like to remind you that examples given in this book are from the 1950s. The child psychology of those years was different than of today. Moderately beating a child was normal in the disciplinary approach of those times. Of course, this does not mean that in order to discipline children, we must beat them. No way. So please, consider the times when this book has been compiled. Actually, all children need rules and well-established boundaries, yet mostly the parents confuse them when mother says no to something as a restriction to the child's excessive behavior. If father undermines his wife's no by letting the child to do the forbidden deed with the assumption of doing a good thing, or mother does such a thing and undermines her husband's attempt for disciplining their child. Because the children are so observant that they quickly learn how to provoke the pity of the parents, how to manipulate the adults, and they grow up without learning about proper boundaries. After all, pity is not compassion. We must remember this. And I remember Mr. Eric Dull's lectures on conscience. He was teaching us about the rational conscience. This criterion we read in this passage may be explained in this way as well. Instead of emotional conscience, we must display rational conscience when we are triggered or provoked by such emotions like pity or empathy. Your words about beggars reminded me the tabloid news about millionaire beggars. When the police arrest such persons, it may turn out that they are so rich that we can feel self-pity or feel like a fool for giving them some money. Or news about the street gangs forcing children and women to beg for money. Yes, we need to check our tendency or desire for doing good for others from those both sides by asking, is it the rational conscience or emotional conscience? As you said, we must check the consequences of the actions before we label them as good and bad.
If our dear friends find this example of a father given in this passage unacceptable, I'd like to ask them if they observe parents doing the homework of their children. I am sure they know such parents. Teacher of the child gives homework for furthering the learning and development of the student. This is the duty of a teacher. Yet, if the delicate balance and rapport between the student and teacher is disrupted, what parents think as support may hinder the development of their child. So, what could be a better approach? Supporting the child to use his or her imagination, encouraging his or her curiosity, talking about the taste of accomplishment after completing tasks, chores, and homework.
I think the reason of all those disruption in the balance between higher and lower realities of conscience is that we humans are still adolescents. We still don't want to take our own responsibility. We want others to do, or tell us what to do, or fix things on our behalf. This others may be parents, elder siblings, teachers, partners, employers, leaders, etc. In the path to maturation and coming of age, the biggest challenge of today's children and teenagers is that they have access to many things effortlessly, and because of this, they don't consider things, situations, and privileges they have valuable. Yes, manifestations of matter's possibilities increase every day, but when we don't spend efforts for having these, then they lose their value in our eyes. We take these granted. However, as we read in this book, it is time for all humankind to step out of this adolescence mentality and mature by widening our comprehension and conscience. And we find in this passage criterion, which ensures the safety and success of the directions of the efforts that must be done in this struggle. All right, let's continue reading. In this way, through getting used in various ways in a life of fits and starts, the means of the body are exhausted. Eventually the body gets sick, aged, and becomes obsolete. The being is obliged to continue its development in milieus that have possibilities beyond the limit of that body's sufficiency. In this case, again with the help of the beings in duty, the old body is abandoned. The being is elevated to the circumstances of the higher stage. For this, the being leaves the world by the event of death. From that moment on, that is, at the initial moments of his transition to the spatium, all secondary influences coming from his surroundings are ceased, except for the influences coming from its own spirit. That being is left completely alone in an isolated state within its own being. This situation is akin to the state of a man who has been put into a room and left there after all of his senses have been removed, so that he is even senseless to his own body. We say akin because spatium life expresses a much more profound and internal loneliness. Therefore, spatium life is not a space for the beings. At that moment, their space is only their beings. Because of this, at the being's initial transition there, it is not possible for it to contact, speak, and meet the world, the superworld, or the beings around him who are similar to him. All connections to his surroundings are severed. This is for natural reasons arising out of the being's state of heavy selfishness, as well as imperatives on which we will elaborate below. This state, after it continues as long as needed, is abolished by the influences that start to come from the surroundings, and the being begins to recognize his surroundings, identity, and needs with his awakened comprehension by means of these influences.
At this point, I'd like to suggest our dear friends to go back in this series and watch the previous videos we together made, almost 1 year ago. I think we discussed the death, dying, and spatium on the 24th and 25th videos. The things we will discuss on this and further passages will be much easier to understand for them.
Yes, this is a good suggestion. Thank you. This passage is an introduction to death, the necessity of death, the spatium period, and soon we will read more additional topics. Why this body becomes useless after acquiring all necessary impressions and information from a given lifetime. Because my being needs to continue its development under many different conditions, and when it finishes its business with this body, it has to withdraw its concentration and influences from the body. We need to revise our approach to death and grief, in this sense.
Yes, and we need to underline the importance of refining our mental and emotional imagery we accumulate throughout of a lifetime. Because when we die, all those imageries somehow determine the quality of the imaginations our being has during that isolated state we call as the spatium. I remember reading from an earlier spiritual communiqué that a being is considered dead when the personality of the dead body in the being is completely detached, when an indifference sets in the being after comprehending the death of its last body.
Yes, we will be delving into the depths of this topic in the following weeks. Now, I'd like to reply to a question from a dear friend. Will be conscious or unconscious in the spatium? How we die, or more correctly, in which state of consciousness we die determines the following states we will have in the spatium. You know, in Anatolian folklore there is saying or good wish. 3 days in bed, in the 4th day grave. Meaning that may there be a period for preparing for death. This is a good wish, because when we die with some prepared mentality, our transition to the next realm will be easier. Because, with this wider comprehension, we gain a mentality for gradual detachment from the worldly attachments. Some people, near death, say their goodbyes properly. Some people ask their close family to give their good wishes if they can. I am sure some of us had witnessed such preparation for the looming death in some family members, especially the elders. However, if we die in a negative mentality, as you reminded us, dear Umit, you had given some very informative examples of such deaths, from earlier spiritual sessions from Mr. Russelman's studies. Yes, you can watch our videos from part 22 to part 25 to hear those examples. Yes, we learn from those examples that when a person dies with feelings of hopelessness, anger, rage, hatred, extreme fear, etc., they don't easily become aware that they are dead, and that the states and moods they die in continue for a while in the spatium period as well. Next week, we will discuss the spatium period in detail. And, as a reply to another frequently asked question, no, spatium is not a place, it is not live. There is a place for the living human beings in the hydrogen realm, and there is another place for deceased human beings outside the hydrogen realm. We will be in the hydrogen cosmos after we die. As we read here, spatium life is not a space for the beings. At that moment, their space is only their beings. You may consider the spatium as an isolated field of energy the being builds around itself for the great accounting after the ending of each lifetime. And within this isolated field, the being faces with all the impressions of its last lifetime, and because the defense or avoidance mechanisms of the worldly personality died, as well, the being is left alone with the raw appearance of its level of conscience. Whatever has been done during a lifetime should be encountered without any chance of avoidance or justification. Yes. Next week we will be reading and discussing more about these topics.
We know that death is not an end, but it seems that I will end my last week with you in this series with death.
Thank you so much, dear friends, for joining us this evening.
Good evening, everyone.